Hey everybody, it's Booksy here. Um, what a crazy 48 hours, huh? So we've seen some really wild stuff in Ater and other stocks, and let me tell you, that whole deal with the Fibonacci fan that I went over, I am still looking into that. I'm learning a lot and finding that my original thesis, which was the 624, even though I still think that 624 is a major target for this stock, and it has been since the beginning of the stock, I actually think that we should look at it more like an upper and lower limit. And that's because I've been taking a lot of the stuff that I was applying to Ader and I was applying it to AMC, and I found that AMC followed much of the same things as well. And I know this is not a AMC channel. I'm not really here to pitch AMC to you. But I also did some work on AMC, and I found that we follow these kind of fans. They sort of like drag us down to certain points in time. And fascinatingly, the ones that, of course, stick out the most are the ones around these runs, and how there's kind of this draw up to certain price targets. Um, but yeah, I mean, specifically, I guess the big one on AMC is that 72. And basically, what I found is that, let me see if I can go back real quick to, it's going to like do all the zooming in stuff. Basically, what I found is that oh no, I went all the way back. I'll just do it again. There is a very strong correlation between these price movements and the direction of the stock. Um, and I think it actually lines up a little bit more with slightly past where it hit 72. But yeah, it's really hard to unsee it once you see it. And you kind of trippy, right? You get this sort of perspective thing going. It looks like it's jumping across a road here. But yeah, you see how these follow, like almost like they're pointing to right here and here, and here you have this weird kind of gaps, and even these, see these little bounces. Sometimes if you line up the fib fans, these bounces actually, you see how they're kind of like skirting from one to the next to the next to the next, as they go. It's pretty wild. And I'm just doing a lot of research into like how we would apply this looking in the future. I do not have really any answers yet as to what this might look like, but I have a theory, and I'll just tell you like what I'm doing right now is I'm basically looking at upper and lower limits. And I know again we're looking at AMC, we're not looking at Ater just yet, but I'm just going to end with this. I'm looking at upper and lower limits. So I've got, this is like an upper, and actually kind of mess with my chart here. It's not what I had before. Let me see if I can go ahead and just reset it. I was trying out 0.25 Fibonacci. Let me see if I can reset, apply defaults, there we go. And basically I was seeing like, okay, let's say there's this point in the future that terminates. Can I, find, basically, can I find a level that, now this looks all wonky. I'll just get rid of the prices and I'll put the levels on the right. That's fine. Because this is upside down. And I just was looking at what if there was this other lower end target at 80 cents, and it seemed to all kind of like point that way as it got more and more extreme over time, and how could I sort of map this out? And I sort of came up with this, and it's not one-to-one, but you can see there are a lot of places where this kind of hits these major um, lines. And then right here we were pinned under the 1.68, and then there's the competing channel, which is down here, and you can see it also provided the same and very similar supports. And so combining these, oh look, I forgot to do this on the other one. Yeah, combining these, you basically just, this should go to here. It doesn't really make a difference because these numbers are scalable. for the most part. It depends on how you line it up, right? So this doesn't really match up now, but when you do this, um, and you do it right, I'm not doing it right, you actually, these are all line up like in sync, and it creates these like pockets. But basically, like what I'm doing is I'm essentially just trying to see if I can figure out maybe if there's an upper and lower limit, what happens when you break through it, and maybe what does it look like? And of course, I'm starting with these sort of lines, right? And I was given this stuff by Ater. So that's what I'm looking at right now with Ater. So like back to the Ater stock, let's talk about what's going on here. So we figured out, that if you drew a line or if you drew a fib fan from, and I'm on the 15-minute right now, so not sure exactly how well this will line up. Whoops, wrong one. Those lines always confuse me. They all look the same. And we go to basically that 624 target. It was like this tiny little area where it looked like they were trying to target 624, and you start looking at how these lines track backwards in time, you start noticing that these lines track pretty darn well. And the thing about a fib fan is you can draw it like a bunch of different ways. So I could draw it like this, and you can see that the lines, they sort of replace the next line. Like, so you can sort of move it around and test things out. And it doesn't really matter, again, because the levels for these fib lines, if it's a Fibonacci, they do line up. And so then you get things like this, where you have basically this kind of really obvious pattern. And at first I was like, well, maybe it means that 6.24 has been the target all along. And I still think to some degree it has. It's been one of the targets because it does track back in time. You can see that I drew it a little better the other day, but you can see that these are hitting on these lines, right? Like the algorithm is saying, let's go this direction. And that's what's significant about this find. It's not the 6.214, although, I mean, that's cool for now to know that that's a really hot spot level for this stock. We should remember that in the future. It's more that the way the algorithm is determining how we get from here to here is along these Fibonacci levels. And I don't think that's super unusual. If you were to look at, and this is why I'm not, like I was really excited when I found it, but I'm a lot more mellow right now because really it makes sense. If you look at a fib retracement, right, on a move, these should line up. Okay, now I did it wrong. Let's do this again. These should line up hypothetically. Like we should see intersections of these lines, and it's kind of hard to tell like where they should be. But the point is like the mathematical distance from here to here to here to here should line up vertically, horizontally, whatever, with some other fib lines. Like that makes sense. Because this is scaling, right, as it goes out from a given point. But that being said, finding where that matches up is really difficult. And I know that what I'm doing on AMC over here in trying to quote unquote predict, right, where we're going to go next, I'm basically doing what I did here, and I'm looking at where are these lines all converging. And so I don't know if I actually have, I may not have them saved. I had to restart my computer, and I lost like a bunch of my lines and junk because I forgot to save. But yeah, basically something like this, okay? And then as you start charting it, you start seeing like where these intersects are. And I noticed there's one kind of around like 231, sort of like right there. That's one, and it's not perfect because you're basically trying to predict, and I don't like the word predict, but you basically are trying to create a visual model for a mathematical algorithm that I guess would be consistent enough. So it can't be perfect, right? Because you're not a computer, and so it's a very difficult thing to do. It kind of makes you feel like maybe this is all like self-fulfilling prophecy stuff, but I really do think that you start drawing these lines and you're getting an idea, just like we did here, of like where does the algorithm want to go next? Where does the algorithm want to take us? And as you get tighter and tighter and tighter, and you can kind of see it here, things get kind of crazy, right? You get this kind of ramp. You get this kind of ramp up. All right. And I'm kind of looking at it like if I'm an archer who's driving down this lane, I've got targets here and here. Like as I get closer, my direction is going to change, right? And that makes sense. So that's how a fan works. And in addition, if I don't have the proper pullback on the bow and I'm not ready to release this thing, then the direction starts to change, right? It starts to kind of wane forward. And now my target looks like a future target. I missed the target. So I start getting these kind of different lines, all right, that don't really point down, straight down, right? But the bullish lines continue to point up. And with AMC, I'm kind of seeing that now there are some differing lines. And, you know, this line right here is basically like right on top of us. And I don't think that that's the one we're going to hit. And I can see this sort of trend appearing that it follows that there are these other momentums, you know, that maybe we hit, it's the same target, you know, maybe oddly enough, we hit the same target, but it's further down the line. The algorithm isn't ready to go there yet. And then likewise, you have these negative targets, all right? And I'm gonna have to kind of speed this up. I don't want to waste a bunch of people's time, but I kind of found one was around like $13. And I'm not just doing like 13 because that's what I found before. I mean, it is what I'm doing because I found it before, but it's also just like, you know, important to note that these kind of line up right here and here, just like these would line up. So there are these targets that are future set, and I think that these targets are things that the algorithm is considering for these trends. So it's like setting in a value that we're gonna, basically when we start going down here, it's already calculated the tip of this wedge and it knows like where the potential breakout could be, and it runs up and then it does the same thing again. And it's the same, right? If the momentum is there, bearish or bullish, it can be the same target each time. And it gives you this idea of like, oh, well, if this thing were to break down right now, let's say it were to break down like right, I'm going to draw a horizontal or a vertical line. If this thing were to break down, where would it go? I think that it's probable, not, it doesn't have to do this, but I think it becomes this high probability range because the algorithm has been targeting this for a potential drop, right? Now, you could zoom in on AMC and see that this thing, these lines actually are more like parabolas if you zoom in. And so there's this kind of idea that while you're low, you're kind of skirting up, right? And as momentum builds, you're pulling it in tighter. And that's not bias. I think that's actually how these algorithms are working. I think that they are basically drawing like across time. They're like drawing the bow back, right? And they're pulling up their targets as they get closer. But it has to be ready to go. And I think right here, it was a good example of this to me starting to look like this original little ton of boost here was trying to go this direction. Now, does that mean that this can't just go straight up, you know, to 231 or something, just like it did back here? Well, I would say that it could, but right now, if I'm just looking at momentum, and that's my only indicator, all right, and you can start seeing like why I'm drawing more than one line here, because you can kind of see it both ways as this thing like parabolas up, that there may need to be an extension on the timeline, or it may not go up. Like it could end up just coasting sideways and just deciding like, oh, well, we need to just set a time that's like way out in the future. And then what it ends up looking like is this, right? Where it's like really flat. Like because the momentum's not there, the volatility is not there. Now, how would I apply this to Ater? So if I look back at Ater, how would I apply this to this stock? Well, if this was indeed some kind of a target point, all right, then we would also have to say that, let me see if this one's cleaner. These are all super messy, my charts. Sorry, I'll do this one. We would also have to say, you can just ignore all my other lines right now. Let me go to the 2 hour, something like this. Okay, if this were a target right here, and let's say that you were drawing these lines to this target, okay, it's reasonable then that perhaps, you know, this target has been targeted. This target has been targeted. Listen to me. You know what? Let's just erase everything. Because, oh, it won't let me do that. You know what, dude? Why not? All right. Just for now. So let's say that maybe we got it right, and this is some kind of a magic target, all right? And it's been trying to get somewhere towards this area for a while. Now it could be past it. That's a possibility. Like if I were wrong, and it were actually lower, and this is something that I'm sort of spitballing now, where would that maybe be? And it might be down here. All right, because in this case, we have this sort of mild uptrend, all right, that's going on. And we can assume, it's okay to assume sometimes, that, because we don't have any other information, right? We can assume that maybe this is trying to follow this line further down. No one wants to hear that. But if that's the case, then maybe that 6.24 was really only for this region. And maybe, and this is the thing, is like, I can draw this like a bunch of different ways because there's a lot of touch points that you could consider. And when you're just looking at a trend, it's really hard to know exactly like where you're supposed to be pointing, right? It's super like up here, you know, if you're looking at up in this region, watch when I move the trend line, right? Like these are pretty minor shifts, but when you look down here, it's shifting quite a bit. So I'm not saying that that 6.24 wasn't important. I think the reason that, you know, it lines up right here is significant. It's because of this little wedge. And I think that's hard to ignore. But if you were to look at other possibilities, you know, I mean, sure, like that's a possibility. Like that this thing was actually aiming for $4.30. And I said earlier in the other videos that there is a like a bearish scenario, right, where this thing wants to go lower. And I talked a lot about this line right here being pretty critical at this point, and it broke it. So that means that it's not really coming back to it really hard. The volume still dried up. That's a good thing in my opinion. I'll tell you why in a bit. But this is not as valid right now unless it recaptures it. This is just a line that we had, and now it's broken, and maybe it'll act as resistance even. I hope not, but it could. So anyways, so how would I apply this to the upward movement? Well, just like I did with AMC, I tried to sort of find like where would an upward target be? And this is where things get a little bit interesting, because I noticed that sure enough, we did have a sort of upward momentum, if you will. Okay, and it's probably a little further out, maybe like that. Yeah. So I'm not trying to like fudge my lines or anything. I'm just trying to be precise as I can about some kind of a target that makes the most sense. And you can see here, like, look at the, even like right up to this point, the upward trajectory is like straight up on some of these. And I know these are just random buys by big institutions, but it's kind of amazing how neatly this kind of stitches together. So why didn't we go that direction? Well, to be honest, I can't really answer that question completely, but I can say that it's probable and possible that as this thing, again, shifts in momentum, that we kind of change targets as we go along. And so there is this sort of idea that if this were to turn, let's say right here, if right here, for some reason, it just broke out here, it just kept going up, where would it end up? It would end up right here, okay? And that's why maybe we have these directional inputs. But not all directional inputs are the same. So sometimes you have this business where it looks like it's going to go right towards it. Then other times you see it goes kind of haywire, goes a little bit more parabolic. And I think these are also valid. And they typically coincide with shorter term runs. But it's usually like, if we were to run back up right now, where would we stop? Maybe right there, okay? Right here, okay? And then maybe right here it's different, it's in the future. So what happened, what happened with Ater, and I'm pretty convinced that this is fairly accurate at this point. What happened with Ater is you had two competing slots, essentially. You had a slot that was looking at this right here. You see how this is like a vertical alignment? And I know this is like super theoretical. This doesn't help you with what's going on today. I'll help you with that in a minute. I just want you to look at this though. This is kind of interesting. I'm going to get rid of this. Well, I want to keep these lines for now. But I'm going to like hide them. Maybe if I can find them. Oh boy. There we go. So what I think happened is that we lost the direction. So I think we lost the battle. Okay, so right here, if this thing were to squeeze, let's say right at this point, let's say all the shorts were like, nope, we got to get out of this thing, we got to get rid of this thing, where would it go? I mean, sure, like at this point, you could see this happening, right? Because it's starting to turn up even higher. But if it were just the same trajectory, the same trajectory, the same trajectory, where would it go? It would go up to $120, okay? Just like it was thinking about it back here, okay? And I bet you that if we were to do the same thing from like this point and go back, we might start seeing some of those patterns emerge as well, back into this region, okay, where you have these sort of directional patterns that are occurring, heading towards some given point in the future that the algorithm thinks it can hit in the given amount of time. So all of that is just a fancy way of saying that an algorithm probably has a starting price point given like what's going on in the market. So if it thinks that there's enough momentum, it's going to move that direction. But in this case, it auto-corrected, right? And it tried to bring us straight down. And I know this is not perfect, but if I were the algorithm, maybe I could draw it perfectly. It's basically like trying to get us to go down right here. You see this? So it's like a constant tug of war between where like the bulls want it to go and the bears want it to go. So the bears are wanting it to go down to this line, the bulls are wanting it to ultimately go up to this line, and the algorithm is just kind of playing both sides, and it's shorting and creating traps and all this other nonsense. And we've seen the cycle, we know how it looks on Ater. But it's pretty fascinating stuff. So is this groundbreaking things? Probably not. I think that, and I know that sounds like, what are you talking about? Well, I think that probably what's going on here, like you can't apply it this way, it doesn't really work. But probably what's going on here is pretty straightforward to institutions. Like they know this, maybe even other traders know this. They just kind of know that this is ultimately like what it comes down to. But what I find fascinating are these kind of like terminal points, right? And this idea that if you push a stock hard enough, like was done with, my cats are going ballistic. Hey, no, don't you do that. They're not listening. But if you push a stock hard enough, we basically like changed the direction of the stock. This stock was heading down these fib channels towards this like 80 cent level, roughly. And you see how sometimes it got like super extreme, like it was trying to just like tank it straight down. And you might be thinking, well, Booksy, people were saying that it was worth like 5 cents or worth like a nickel or whatever. That's true. And so there are people who have this price target in mind, like, no, this thing needs to go like straight down and keep going. But I think that just looking at like the conservative downtrends, and some of these, again, they get kind of parabolic, like they're going to drop straight down. But just sort of finding them, like what direction they're kind of facing, like the more conservative ones. That's why I picked 80 cents, and I think it worked pretty well. And it worked all the way up until about here. You get really close, and then it doesn't anymore. So what happens is that because of what went on with the short squeeze, I know the buy button got removed. Maybe it would have went a little higher and then done the same kind of bouncing pattern instead of dipping. But it doesn't really matter. Like it ended up running back up to this level. So because of that, essentially like this is the prime example of like, well, in this case it was apes, the ape community, but it was bulls, right? Like bulls drove it to the terminal point. Where bears were trying to drive it down to the terminal point, and maybe we would have seen it bounce here and bounce here and bounce here, and then start kind of maybe get a little bit of a run, but it would eventually come to this terminal point, and then who knows? It doesn't have to bounce; it could keep going down. So you had this tug of war, but this was a huge correction. It just yanked it back the other way, and I think that's a really fascinating way of looking at it. And if you look at that with Ater, it's almost like that's what was about to happen. Okay, maybe that was about to occur. I don't really know. I don't really like that line. Maybe that one. You can kind of see like this right here. But I think that maybe that was about to happen. But what happened is this giant dip occurs, right? This creates a huge amount of FOMO, and the volume spikes, and then that auto correct down to 624. That's where I found that Fibonacci triangle. Very fascinating. It just pulled it down on an algorithm clearly, and it hit all these Fibonacci levels. And even on the way down, there was still this tug of war going on, but there was not enough momentum. So what happened once we passed the threshold? Well, to be honest, when we passed the threshold, things changed. And this is all theoretical. I know that I sound like a crazy person, but trust me when I say that I think there's still a lot of validity to looking at these and just determining like where could this thing be trying to go. There's a lot of different directions here, right? Some of these are like straight down, some are more like to the side, but we're starting to sort of see how this goes down, and then this one goes a little bit more out, and then this one goes a little bit more out. All right, this to me indicates it's bulls are turning it around again, a little bit, like it's fanning. And so if this pattern were to continue, let's say it does keep going down, but the pattern were to continue, we might expect to see something like this. Who knows where we'd be at that point? Maybe more flat, and then eventually, if bulls continue, maybe you see this twist back around. Okay. And we end up having more of a new target, right, in the future, based on like what the bulls want to see. I'm not saying it's going to go to 245 or something, but certainly like that's possible. And already right here, you're kind of seeing maybe like this target being set up. So I don't know for sure that's the number. I'm just saying like you can kind of see it already. And so this looks like a crazy spider web. So now we come to like the day, right? Like what's going on today? How are we supposed to feel about it? I don't really think, for the most part, I don't really think it matters too much. I know that's not really helpful, but once you kind of see the big picture on this thing, it just doesn't feel as, oh gosh, some of these were hidden for a reason. It doesn't feel as bad as it sounds. And I'll be honest with you, this right here threw me for a loop. I think that we had I gotta go back to the 15-minute. I talked about the fractal a lot, and I talked about how that fractal is how I found what I thought was the terminal point right around here, I think. The 624 was how I found that terminal point on what should have been the tip of the wedge right there, and that's how I went backwards. And then we saw the fractal repeat again right here. You see that? It's the same fractal. It's just kind of like run up, and then it sort of hard stops, comes down, it sort of teeters, and then it drops. Run up, teeter, drop. And I thought that's really odd. Maybe it's competing. Maybe there's a competing wedge here, and I think that that's probably part of it. When you look at, I think I put this on my other chart. When you look at, when you look at like this fractal, right, we saw it finish. And that's where I was like kind of confused, is that we actually saw this fractal kind of finish. Okay, ignore that area up there. We saw it finish. It did the run up. This is it right here. And if that's to be believed, then that was it. And I was having trouble like wrapping my brain around that. I was like, well, could that have been it? Because we did break out of that tiny wedge and have a little run up. We broke out of that wedge, we had a little run up. And it sounds impossible, but then when you really look at this thing, you know, it's kind of where it is. Now, other indicators are in very different spots than we were back here. So that tells me that obviously, and we didn't have the volume that we had back here, and definitely not the bullish volume. So that tells me that the algorithm is finishing like it tried to do what it wanted to do, but it shortened it, and it went immediately into this kind of bearish downtrend. And I saw this other fractal, and I thought that's really odd, you know, because we see this fractal repeating again. And I noticed that there were, on the last run, let me see if it's this one. Yeah, there it is. On the last run, we actually had a couple different ways you could draw it, and I talked about this in another video. And so I went back and I said, okay, well, let me draw this from a couple different perspectives. One that's a little wider, one that's more narrow. And I did find that, you know, on the whole, you can draw this like a lot of different ways. And so some of these touch points look really random, but they're almost like, it's almost like retail was buying and selling at these points because they thought these were touch points. And then the algorithm kind of plays into that. Like it knows all the possible. You got to understand, these things are computers. They're doing this like in their computer brains, right? They're figuring out these terminal points like instantly. So I think that's kind of what was going on here and why we saw this particular fractal start again, because we're at the top of a different wedge. And this is a way that some people may have drawn it. There's still this other thesis that I'm not really into, but I think it's possible, I guess, that this is all one giant wedge. We never broke out. And maybe if this happens, then I'll believe it. Maybe this isn't really, this is just like a mini breakdown of what was supposed to happen. It definitely played out in terms of fractals, and this bit right here happening right here. It was very, very, very similar to what happened here. And it definitely made me think, and still makes me think, that we're on a new cycle. But if we are on a new cycle, it could be very short. It could be a very short cycle. And that would be really interesting. That would maybe break from what we've seen with the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And maybe just the volume that was brought into this thing really did cause the computer to do something different. It's possible. You know, we can't close doors until they're closed. And one of the things I said in the other videos was this could break. And if it breaks, then we're talking more bullish, or excuse me, more bearish. But that being said, let me just point something out to you, and this is where I'll end the video. So let's say this is let's say this is the new cycle right here. This is the first U, and now we're forming a wedge. It's a short U. Like, this is a really short U. This only happened over like 6 days or something, 6 bars. And then this definitely doesn't look like, you know, I mean, unless you just really exaggerate it, this doesn't, to me, look like it would be the actual wedge. And the other wedge, it took 9 bars, it took 9 days to fill out. This doesn't look like it to me. It could be. It could be like we just kind of go straight up parabolic, and then this ends up proving to be the wedge. I mean, look here. You know, we've seen this before where it kind of comes off and comes back down, comes off, comes back down. Like it doesn't. There are spots where it really follows it cookie cutter, maybe like we saw right here. But maybe the reason that it went up when it did, this is one option. Maybe the reason it went up when it did was because of this trend line. And then it was like, well, we don't really need to respect this trend line. So we come back down, and we're going back down to find the bottom of this sort of U shape, which would be for accumulation. And this is really interesting. This just broke out today. I'll have to take a look at that. Ignore this white one, but this right here, it just broke out and heading up towards 0. This is the CMF, which is chalk and money flow. This is the one that when it's cutting up past negative 0.15, we're talking about accumulation starting, right? And then it gets up here, it starts distributing. Yeah, so this is really interesting. I like this kind of slow move up. It could build some momentum. It doesn't have to. It could obviously just drop, but this is kind of, I don't know, this is kind of important, I think. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It hasn't really done a whole lot to convince me it's going to stay there. It could easily dip back down and just keep going. But my point is that let's say that this is the bigger one. Where would it have to happen? It would have to be really soon. It would have to be like Monday. We would just see it rip up. And then we may see like a really huge move to the upside. And then we start the wedge. That is a possibility. That's one possibility. That's a very bullish possibility. And then we don't really need to worry about this line anymore because we're going up. And maybe it does respect it later, but it just didn't, you know, for this particular move because it needed to come back down and test this circle. I don't know. Or this cup. Another possibility is that we're looking at this as the main cup right now. And that it really did terminate very early. And this is kind of, I don't like this one as much. Obviously, this is more bearish. But if I'm being honest, like this makes the more sense because it did kind of completed this fractal already, you know. It's finished, and I don't think it needed to go on. And when I look at what happened right here with this kind of walk down and then drop, it looks a lot like this, where you have this walk down and then a sudden drop, and it's going back to find new supports. But you never know. I mean, we don't know for sure until this thing plays out. And that's the thing about technicals. I can give you possibilities. Hopefully you don't hear me giving you predictions where I'm saying, oh, it's got to do this or that. Like, it doesn't have to do anything. I just look at it. I try to analyze what's going on and see, you know, what are the possibilities here? And if this is the possibility, and this is one of them, if this is what it is, there's a lot of things that can happen. This could be the new triangle. Like, this could be the new wedge we're in. Well, I don't know. It could be. I don't know. If you drew it wider, maybe it's like this. I don't like that, but it could be. Or you could do it like this, and maybe that's the new bottom, and it's going to come up here and rattle around. We can't tell right now. There's a lot of possibilities. What we could do is probably compare it to some of these other indicators and see what's most likely. Like, see where there's major extremes maybe on the indicators. Looking at RSI, MACD, and stuff like that as well, just to kind of get like a sentiment of where things start to turn, where they have turned. That might give us more of an idea. But where would this want us to be? Where would this want us to be going? So, like, I don't think it really matters right now. I think you can kind of just make your best guess that this is probably where it wants us to go, down to like 520. Now, if this ends up being like wrong, and it could, I mean, certainly, like, it doesn't have to go down that far. And this looks like a very tiny wedge to me. That's why I'm not really sure yet. I don't think that this is the wedge yet, but we'll see. This would make sense to come back and touch this point because we've been here before. But this is super short. This is a super short cycle if that's the case, and we would see it cycle again. And that would be very unusual. So my guess, it's just a guess, is that this is actually going to be a little bit of a bigger wedge, and maybe look more like, I don't know, maybe it'll look more like this. Maybe we will still dip down. Maybe we won't. Maybe it'll just compress. I do want to show you one more thing. So there's a lot of options here. Could be this is a bigger part of the U. Kind of unsure about that one, but it's possible. And then we see this kind of rocket on, end of week or Monday, and it rockets. Maybe they just kind of keep it down in these levels for a couple days, and then it goes. Or we're in a new wedge already, and it's going straight down. They're doing their best to get it straight down, or we're going sideways. I will say this. Their volume is very, very low still, even though it's selling. It's still low. Is the volume enough to tank it? Well, possibly. I mean, surely if you can keep taking out short positions, you saw this garbage back here, where they just dropped it out of nowhere. That's totally possible. I will say that you need to be open-minded about it, but at the same time, understand that this is, when we're talking about stock market, we can't really make, for technical analysis, we can't make predictions based on what we want to have happen. We have to just like what could happen, right? And we knew that there could be a dip. I didn't think it was likely because of this support, and it held for a long time. It held for like a week, more than that. But it just didn't hold right here, and I don't know what the aim is just yet. If this is the start of the wedge, or again, if this is just part of the bigger U, I don't know. I mean, look, this took a long time to play out, and we're still on we have a few more days in this. We'll see what happens. But yeah, even if it went down, I'm still really bullish, and I'll stop the video with this, but basically I'm not convinced that bears are as strong as they think they are here. I really don't see the case for it. We're talking about a real company here, real people, and even if they broke this line, and they did, there's this other line they have to deal with, which is the retest of this major downtrend. And remember, when you flip it over, that does not look strong to me. It just doesn't. So I mean, you could say like, oh, well, breaking out of that's strong. Like maybe it'll teeter up and sideways. Like sure, but that's not strength. Like look at how far this move was. Look at how far this move was. Look at the direction. Look how vertical these were. And then look where we're at now. Look how horizontal it is going. Flat. I mean, yeah, you have these big dips, but then they flatten out. Big dip, flatten out. I mean, it's not like these were real dramatic. And I really think that, yeah, like it's trying to get to some price. Some institution that's shorting this wants a certain price for accumulation. I think that we're in the accumulation zone already. I think that this is part of it, this whole region down here, right? Anything below this marker, I think, is an accumulation zone. I don't think that they're just going to distribute down forever and ever. But, this looks okay, but it's not awesome. I mean, what's happened every time here is they've run it up and then it's just boom, plummeted. Run it up and then boom. So, if I'm looking at it from that point of view, these are getting smaller. So anyways, I'll leave you with that today. Hopefully that's encouraging. I don't see this having much more downside.